Hello, my name is Garvin, and I read things and chatter about them on the internet for your entertainment. Today, we're continuing our look at Lemuria and popular culture, and that has led us to an interesting place, because we're looking at a German science fiction series, the Perry Rhodan series. But some of you might be asking, what is that? And that's a fair question, so let's turn to and find out. Perry Rhodan may actually be the longest running science fiction series in the world. It was first published in 1961 in what was then West Germany, and is still going today with over 3,000 issues that have been published in weekly installments, with a combined page count of over 300,000, especially if you count miniseries and various spin offs. It has sold over 2 billion novellas and novels, with over a billion being sold in Germany alone. So, while in some circles it does have a reputation as being lowbrow pulp slop, a lot of people, especially a lot of German speaking people, are reading this series. Created by Walter Ernsting, who also wrote under the name of Clark Dalton, and Karl Herbert Scheer, both were West German science fiction authors who had been active since the late 40s for Scheer and the early 50s for Ernsting. Walter Ernsting was born in 1920, and he was conscripted into the German military during World War II, where he served on the East Front and was captured by the Soviet Union, so he would serve as a POW in Siberia for years. He was eventually released, and then he went to West Germany and he started working as a translator for the British. And that's where he came into contact with British and American science fiction and was instantly intrigued. He would write some stories for science fiction, but Germans at that time wouldn't buy a science fiction story written by a native German. So to get around that, he invented Clark Dalton, a fictional British science fiction writer, and then sold his own works as translations of Clark Dalton's writings, which is honestly kind of clever if you think about it. He would also work as a translator and an editor for various German science fiction magazines, and he would keep writing for Perry Rhodan from 1961 to 1992. And he would pass away in the year 2005 at the age of 84. Honestly, not a bad run, and he did leave a sizable legacy behind him. K.H. Scheer, as he was known professionally, was honestly luckier in his early life, because he was born in 1928, and while he began training as a Marine engineer, the war ended before he was called to active service. He started writing in 1948 and would create the German science fiction series ZBV. For those of you wondering, that's Zulu Bravo Victor. And he did that in 1958, and that series would run to 1980. He would work on Perry Rhodan as well from 1961 until the 70s, where he had to step back due to health concerns, although he did occasionally work on other projects, and he managed to return to Perry Rhodan in the 1980s. Sadly, he passed away in 1991 at the age of 63. While I would rather live to 84 myself, 63 is still a good run, and he also left a respectable legacy behind him, I feel. However, the series wasn't dependent on its creators, because Perry Rhodan was worked on by a rotating crew of writers, and that allowed it to keep going even if its creators couldn't keep working. Which is a lot like how modern comic books work in the United States. Stan Lee may have created the X-Men, for example, but it continued without him with new writers and artists. For example, writer Chris Claremont is incredibly famous for his X-Men work. And that does help the longevity of certain projects, but man, I can only hope Perry Rhodan has managed to avoid some of the problems that long-running comic book series run into. But that's really a conversation for another day, so let's get moving. So, the stories are usually published in what we would call a light novel format today. Traditionally, Perry Rhodan books are about 64 pages, so that's about a novella, which is either a serialized story, meaning a story that's spread over several issues, or a self-contained story, depending on the issue itself. The format lends itself to works for the masses, with mass appeal, which are traditionally loathed by government and various elite groups. This is kind of traditional, as light novels are the modern descendants of dime novels and penny dreadfuls, which were also loathed by government authorities and various cultural elites. There have been repeated attempts to ban or curtail the format in Germany, and these have always failed. The last ban that I could find was during World War II, and it was actually fairly successful, but that was due to a paper shortage more than anything else. Anyways, enough background, let's talk about the series itself. The series is named after the main protagonist, Major Perry Rhodan of the US Space Force. So, they saw this coming in 1961, I guess. Perry Rhodan is leading the first manned lunar mission in 1971. They were pretty close there, but they did underestimate us just a little bit. The world that Perry Rhodan lives in is a world that is minutes away from nuclear war. It is a tripolar world. There is the Asian Federation, which, as far as I can tell from the old novels, is a combination of India, the People's Republic of China, and varying neighboring Asian states. That is opposed by the US-led West Bloc, which seems to be mostly NATO and friends. And the Soviets are here, but they and the Warsaw Pact are a distant third place. For people kind of looking cockeyed at the idea of India and the PRC combining, I should note that this seemed entirely possible in 1961, when the People's Republic of China and the Republic of India were actually very close, and it was the Sino-Indian War of 1962, along with other things, that killed that friendship. I'll link a very short video in the description to explain that, but let's get back to the story. So, the plot of the first novel is Major Rhodan leading a moon mission where his ship loses contact with Earth and is forced to make an emergency landing on the far side of the moon, rendering them unable to re-establish contact with Earth. He and his crew realized this had to have happened through the actions of a third party, and as they try to move away from their ship to set up communications and they're foiled, they are able to use that to figure out the source of the jamming. Perry leads a mission to the source of this jamming and finds an alien craft that is intact but damaged and unable to lift off. Here, he meets the Arconites from planet Archon in the M13 cluster. The M13 cluster is a real place, by the way. These aliens are an ancient people that once dominated interstellar space, but in their own words, they have succumbed to physical and mental degeneration. Large chunks of their crew, for example, are completely addicted to digital entertainments called Sims, and they're simply unable to wrest their attention away from their games long enough to do things like repair the ship. The only people who seem free of this is the ship's science officer, Cress, and the ship's captain, Thora. It's also revealed that the ladies of this species are more resistant to the degradation, as it's called. That said, Cress is a man, but he's also suffering from a disease that this group have been unable to cure, and they actually left their home planet to find a way to do that. I should note that the Arconids look human, although there are some internal differences, and they also tend to have white hair and red eyes, which I imagine would make them stand out in most groups. Perry brings the ship's doctor in to examine Cress, and they find that his disease is very comparable to leukemia, and Cress's biology is close enough to human that they believe that a cure can be possible with Earth medicine, but he's going to need to come to Earth and be exposed to the full force of medical infrastructure for that to work. And Perry is willing to set up a trade of technology and scientific knowledge in exchange for this medical treatment, but once he's done that, he realizes a problem with this deal. You see, if he brings this technology back to the United States, the Soviets and the Asians will find out. and realize they're about to face a United States that is thousands of years ahead of them technologically. And rather than risk that, they'll launch their nuclear weapons, causing World War III. And if he goes to the Russians or to the Asians, the United States will launch their weapons, and it's entirely possible the Soviets and the Asians would launch on each other. While they're friendlier to each other than they are to the United States, they still don't want either one of those becoming that advanced. Perry then thinks about just telling everybody about this, but realizes this would cause a race to the moon to try and get alien secrets, which would then lead to World War III. Since he doesn't want to cause the apocalypse, Perry then plans out a way to bring this technology to Earth safely, using a certain definition of safe. And he believes the only way to do that and keep civilization going and bring humanity to space is to force the world to unite. And he's going to do it by pointing a metaphorical gun at the head of all the great powers. I go into more details on this in a written book review that will be linked below, but just to kind of sum up here, the premise is really interesting and the story is very inventive. However, it is held back by the writing conventions of its time. The characterizations tend to be very thin and one note. The plot doesn't really throw up what I would consider serious obstacles to our characters, and everyone on Team Good Guy kind of works together a little too easily, with maybe one exception. That said, if you have a certain tolerance for old science fiction writing, this wasn't half bad, and at least it had an interesting premise and was willing to embrace it fully and just run out that idea to its logical conclusion, and I applaud that. Well, on that note, I think this is a good place to end this week's video. I hope you found this video informative, or at least entertaining. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, or consider subscribing. All of these help me in my eternal struggle against the dread Lord Algorithm. Terror be on his name. If you'd like a voice on the subjects of future videos, consider joining my Everwise patrons for $1 a month. There's also a link in the description below. Speaking of patrons, I'd like to give a special thanks to Big Steve. As always, man, we could not do this without you. Next week, we're going to look at Perry Rhodan Neo, the modern retelling of this story, and after that, we're going to dive into the Perry Rhodan miniseries, Lemuria. Now you see the connection. I hope you'll join me for that, but until then, take care of yourself, take care of each other, and of course, keep reading.